today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a game that was played between myself and Magnus Carlsen, the 5-time world chess champion, in the late Title Tuesday on May 7th in the great year of 2024. Now, this game that was played between us occurred in the fateful 11th and final round of Title Tuesday. Going into this round, you had myself on 9 points out of 10 and Magnus Carlsen trailing by half a point with 8.5 points out of 10. As such, with Magnus having the white pieces, if he were to win the game, he would win Title Tuesday. If I draw or win, I would win the event. So very, very critical last round game, and let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with the move e4 here. I play the move e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5, and now I play the move knight to f6. Now this, of course, is the classic Berlin defense in the Ruy Lopez opening. It's become one of the most prominent or promising variations, that I should say, with all the top players playing it from time to time. We get d3 from Magnus. I go bishop c5. He plays c3 here. Important move, by the way, because if Magnus were to castle, there is this move knight to d4, which I actually played in an earlier round against Gucci Reza Firouzja, who represents France. That game would end in a draw. I believe that was in the 9th round, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, castles allows knight d4, and in a critical must-win game, c3 is a little bit more precise because now the knights don't come off the board and you keep all of the pieces in play. Here I play the move d5. We get knight d2, castles, and takes, and now bishop c4, queen d8, and b4, bishop e7, and the move castles. Now keep in mind, as you look at this game, you're probably going to notice that the time situation is fairly slow. Now the reason I was actually using quite a bit of time in this opening is because I was trying to debate which variation to play. Now keep in mind, I recently played this tournament in Toronto, Canada, called the Candidates, and one of the openings that I was looking at a lot preparing for both the white and the black side was, of course, this Berlin defense. So it's worth pointing out, of course, that in the Candidates, I had this very horrible game which I lost to Vidit, where he played the move d6, but normally black can also play for d5 to try and strike in the center right away. So back to the game here, we got the move b4, and now I used a bit of time before playing this move bishop e7. Now the reason I used some time was I was trying to, in my mind, recall the variation, whether to play bishop e7 or whether to play bishop d6. Now there's nothing wrong with trying to recall which variation to play during the game, but in blitz game, it's probably better to just go with your first instinct and move rather than try to figure it all out and play perfect chess. Nonetheless, I play this move bishop to e7, and now Magnus decides to castle his king, and I play the move a6 here, get a4, and I go knight d5. Now this, of course, is slightly wrong. What I should have played here was this move bishop to f5, trying to pressure the pawn on d3 in one go. Here white has two options. White can play either queen to e2, guarding the pawn on d3 and pressuring the pawn on e5, or white can play this move queen to c2, guarding this pawn on d3 here and intending to potentially play knight to e4 or rook to e1, trying to go after the pawn on e5. So after a4, I now play this move knight d5, and this is not necessarily a horrible move, but it's not the best move. Magnus goes queen to c2 here, a logical move, simply guarding the pawn on c3. Now keep in mind, I can of course turn off the feedback so you guys don't see what the computer thinks is the best move, obviously, but I know some people in recent recaps I've done, they actually like having it on. So Magnus plays queen c2, guarding this pawn on c3, and now I play this move rook e8. This is already a slight mistake here. Probably, again, I should have played this move bishop to f5, trying to pressure the pawn on d3, because now if white plays this move rook to e1, trying to win the pawn on e5, I have knight to b6, hitting the bishop, which guards this pawn on d3, and in general, black should be completely fine here, especially if I can capture this bishop, which is really nicely placed on this long diagonal. After bishop f5, white should probably go knight e4, and after bishop to g4 here, black is probably doing completely fine, but alas, I didn't play this. And you know what's funny is, looking at this position, I feel like I've seen this position before, which probably means this is what I looked at during the Candidates, but of course the Candidates happened a couple of weeks ago. Obviously there's been a lot of brain rot with me playing all these chess tournaments and not studying, so I simply didn't remember it. Alas, I played rook to e8. Magnus now decides to play the move rook to e1, and I go bishop f8. Now this is simply a bad move here, but one of the problems is that Magnus's moves here are much easier to play and my moves are difficult, and the reason I say that is because white has very simple plans. White wants to pressure the pawn on e5 here with the rook and the knight. White might want to go b5, disturbing the knight on c6, which guards the pawn, or white might want to go knight e4 or even queen b3. So white has 4 different plans, and white gets to choose which one he wants to go for. Black has to try and react and be ready for every single plan, and in a blitz game, it's a very, very dicey situation when this occurs. It's sort of like playing football, for example, where the quarterback has an audible. I'm sorry if I'm using an American sports reference, but it's like American football, where the quarterback can change the play at the line of scrimmage to do whatever he wants, and you try to react, you try to be ready for what he's going to do. Now, in the case of American football, if your name is Patrick Mahomes, you can audible on every play, and you're going to score touchdowns more often than not. But nonetheless, that's the analogy I would use to compare this game. So here I play the move bishop f8, trying to guard the pawn, but now Magnus is able to play d4, striking hard in the center. Now at this point, it's very difficult to play for me because I have a lot of problems. First of all, my pawn on e5 is under attack from the pawn, the horse, and the rook. Now I'd love to simply take the pawn on d4, but if I take the pawn on d4, white can trade the rooks on e8, take this knight on d5, and suddenly I've lost a horse for nothing. And if I try to go queen e1, going for the ice skater, this would be the classic Botez gambit, as white can take the queen and win the game. So now the pawn on e5 is under pressure, the knight on d5 is weak, white has these diagonals, and it looks very, very dangerous. So here I play this move knight to b6, and the reason I play knight b6 is I'm trying to take the bishop on c4, and now Magnus plays this move bishop b3. Now the computer actually thinks if white sacks the bishop with bishop takes pawn followed by queen takes h7 and knight to e4 and knight to g5, white is actually close to winning here. But in a blitz game, it's very tricky to go for this because Magnus here, I'm sure, could sense that he has an advantage both on the board but on the clock as well. And one important point is that when you do sacrifice material, usually the onus shifts completely, and when you're down the piece, you have to prove the attack right away. You have to use time, find the best moves, because if you don't, you're simply down material and you will lose the game. So Magnus plays bishop to b3 here, and now I play this move queen to f6. This, as you can see, is simply a blunder. Computer is not a fan at all, but it's a very hard position to play. If I try to take on d4 here, once again I lose the game because now white can swap and go knight to g5, threatening to checkmate on h7 and create a fork on f7 as well. And this knight and the queen and the bishop combine very harmoniously to create massive threats. Now if you guys were watching the live stream as I was playing the game on my kick stream, I did consider this variation. I thought I had queen e1 knight f1, but after g6, at the very least, white can take here and play something like knight to e6. Actually, not knight e6. What did I see here? Not queen a2. I thought white had something here. I think I thought white had knight h7 actually, because now if I take the knight, there's checkmate and 1 on g6, and if I take the bishop, I think white can go knight takes bishop. If I take back, it's uh-oh spaghetti-o, bishop h6, checking the king and winning the queen. Now of course the computer obviously laughs in my face. It points out you have bishop f5 and suddenly black is in the game, but it's very, very hard to go for this because it looks wrong, it looks wrong, it feels wrong, and if I'm not right and I don't calculate this precisely, I also am just going to lose the game on the spot. So I play the move queen to f6 here. Now Magnus goes knight to e4, and I play queen g6. Now I've managed to not lose this pawn on e5 here, but white has these knights that are very well placed, bishop on a great diagonal, and it feels like I'm hanging on by a very thin thread. Magnus goes a5 here, kicking the horse from b6. I have to go back to d7, and now he plays this move knight h4. Now once again, computer says that bishop takes f7, sacking the bishop would win the game, because if I take with the queen, there's knight e to g5, forking the queen on the pawn. If I move my queen to d5, queen takes h7 is simply checkmate on the king. If I go queen to g6, now white can go queen to a2, checking the king, and after king h8, knight to f7. If I don't give up the queen, I move the king, there's a double check with knight h6 followed by queen to g8, which would be checkmate. And if I take with the queen on f7 after queen takes queen, I'm simply down a queen for a knight and a bishop, and I will lose the game in short order. So moral of the story, kids, is that at the end of the day, you need to study tactics, you need to do your puzzle rush, because if you don't, sometimes you're going to miss things, and even the world champion, the best player in the world, is missing basic tactics. So after knight d7, Magnus instead goes knight to h4. I play queen to h5, and now he again misses bishop f7 when he plays knight to g5. Bishop takes f7 would win the game as usual, because if I take with the queen, same problem, knight to g5. Even with the knight on h4 instead of f3, it makes no difference, as these two squares are covered. Queen cannot go to g6, and after queen h5, same problem, check, check, bing, bang, boom, and white gets the checkmate. So Magnus goes knight g5 instead, and now I play knight to d8 temporarily. I'm holding the glue together by the thinnest of threads I'm guarding the pawn on f7 with the knight, and the queen guards his pawn on h7 against a very important checkmate idea with queen takes pawn. Magnus goes knight to f3, and now I play this move pawn to h6. Now this, of course, only gets one question mark, which is funny because it's more than a one question mark blunder. It should have like a big red double question mark, but it only gives me a yellow one question mark, which shows just how flawed the chess.com system of giving out correct moves or symbols is, because h6 is a move that should have be big red move, 2 question marks, losing the game, or 4 question marks, as someone in chat points out. Now, I didn't spot it right away when I played h6, so I thought h6, I'm attacking the knight. Knight's got to move back. I'm fine. But pretty much as soon as I played h6, I realized there's a big problem. Now, the problem with this move is that white has this move, queen to h7, which is simply checkmate on the spot, ending the game immediately. There is no continuation. My king is stuck. That's game over. So I played h6, and now Magnus took a little bit of time, and he played this move knight to e4. Now I have seen some speculation. People in my stream are thinking that Magnus intentionally played knight e4, that he saw queen h7, but he decided he didn't want to go for it. I will categorically say that I'm pretty sure that's not correct, because once Magnus played knight to e4 and I played queen g6 here, Magnus went into a 36-second think before playing this move knight to g3. Now, a very comparable situation would be in the Chess Champions Tour a while back. Magnus played against Jan Nepomniachtchi, the former 2-time runner-up for the World Championship, and Magnus actually missed a forced checkmate in that game. And whether it was the next move or 2 moves later, there was a moment where Magnus basically went into this deep tank. He rolled back in his chair, and he was so disgusted by everything, and he didn't make a move quickly. And the same thing happened here as well. As soon as Magnus played, I suspect as soon as he played knight e4, or as soon as queen g6 came, he suddenly realized that he missed queen h7, and he was completely disgusted with himself, because how on earth can the world champion, the 5-time world champion, greatest player of our times, miss a very simple mate in 1? But again, I do think for both of us, it was simply a matter of just this mutual blindness and thinking that our opponent couldn't make such a blunder. So he plays knight e4, queen g6, and now he goes knight g3. I trade the queens, but unfortunately, as seems to happen with every game Magnus plays, when he makes a blunder, he still has such a good position that I'm in a lot of trouble nonetheless. The reason I'm in trouble, even though material is even, I've got to still have this very, very weak pawn on e5. All my pieces are not developed at all, and white has a massive spatial advantage, especially with potentially a flying V in the center of the board. So here I go knight c6, trying to guard the pawn on e5. Magnus now plays bishop a4. I go bishop d6, desperately trying to protect this pawn on e5, even though there's massive pressure from the pawn, the knight, and the rook, and pressure on one of the defenders from the bishop on a4. Magnus goes knight f5, and I play knight to f6. Apparently here I should have played rook to d8. Hard move to find. I go knight f6, he trades, takes the pawn on e5, takes on c6, and now goes rook e5. Here I play bishop to g4, Magnus plays bishop e3, and now I trade for the knight, and the rooks come off, and I go knight d5. Now at this point in the game, I'm down 1 pawn here. White does have a 3-on-2 majority, but white has stacked pawns on f2 and f3, so my chances to save the game are fairly decent. Magnus goes bishop d2, I play rook d8, and now we get a huge blunder with this move king to f1. Now it's kind of funny that king f1 is a double question mark move, but h6 wasn't when it allowed queen h7, ending the game in one shot. Now I suspect at this point Magnus probably was just like kind of disgusted and making moves. He plays king f1, which allows me this great tactic with knight takes pawn on b4, and after pawn takes knight, rook takes bishop, and rook c1 here. All I have to do is play this move rook to d6, and the game would end in a draw. Now I suspect because I was low on time and both of us probably were a little bit frazzled and shaken by the fact that we both missed this mate in 1, I simply missed the very obvious move rook d6, which would have drawn on the spot, and instead I play this move rook d4. Magnus takes on c6, I take on b4, rook a6, I go rook to a4, making sure that he cannot move his rook away, and now the rook is in front of the pawn. We get king e2, I go rook a3, trying to stop the king from coming up, but also spying this pawn on f3. Magnus goes f4, I play g5, we get rook takes pawn, I take on a5, rook h5, I check, king f3 takes, and rook g5. Now as you'll notice, after king h7 and rook g4 here, white is going to be up 1 pawn, as he will capture this pawn on f4, but with a rook and a pawn versus a rook and 2 pawns, this should be a draw. Unfortunately, it's right at this moment when I knew the danger was gone that I take my foot off the wheel, or I stop paying full attention, and I play this move f5 without thinking, expecting rook takes f4 and king g6 and drawing the game. Now keep in mind here, if I play a move like f6, rook f4, and king g6, again, even though white has an extra h pawn, this game will be a draw. This is a theoretical draw, and I should never ever lose this game. So After rook g4, I play this move f5 expecting rook takes pawn, but now Magnus plays this move rook g5, and much to my horror, I suddenly realize that at this point I'm going to lose both of these pawns, and even though technically speaking it's still a draw, with 20 seconds on the clock, it's going to be very hard to prove. So I go here, takes, rook h3, rook g2, rook h5, he goes king e5, here f4, rook h3, and I decide to give up the pawn here, and the reason I do is because after king h7, king f6, king h6, I assume that white has some way to make more progress. Apparently white doesn't, but I assume there's some way for white to win the game. So I go rook h3, he takes, I go here, king g4, rook h1 here, and king g6. Now keep in mind white is ahead by 2 pawns in this position, but because it's the split pipos on the h and the f files, this is still a theoretical draw. Game continues with h4, I play here, h5, rook h1, rook h3, check. At this point, of course, both of us down to 4 seconds on the clock. It is a big mess. I check, I go here, I check, and now I go rook a1 here, king h7 here, and now I check. We get this, rook a1 back, we get f5, I check, he goes back, I go back, rook h4, check, block, rook a1 here, check, and now rook a1, rook to e8, rook a5, and now Magnus plays this move king to e6. Now rook a5 is a big mistake, by the way, because after rook a5 and king g5, white is winning. What I should have played in this position was put the rook on a2, because now when white goes king g5, I can start checking from behind once again with rook to g2. But I go rook a5, and now Magnus plays this move king to e6, which is a huge mistake. So in this position, king takes h6 would actually lead to a draw here, because if white goes rook g8 trying to cut the king off, I can just start checking the king from the side basically forever until the king goes back far enough. And when the king starts coming too close, if the king starts coming too close here, for example here, I have checked to win the pawn. If king c3, I can go rook f4 and the game will be a draw. If white in this position plays the move f6, once again I can start checking, king f7, check, rook to e7, and now there's a very important nuance here, which is that I have to play the move rook to a6, stopping white from moving the king up because you would lose the pawn on f6. Alas, when all is said and done, of course at this point we have no time on the clock here, I play this move rook to a6, which is a huge mistake because now after king to f7, white is actually winning the game. I play rook a5 here, I can't take with the king because then there's rook to e6 check, forcing the trade of the rooks. I go rook a5, f6, and now I take on h6. But here, unfortunately, without the rook on a6, now white has time to move the king forward, and I can no longer capture the pawn, and this is a theoretical win. I go rook a7, get f7, here, rook e7, check, rook here, and now Magnus finds the winning line with rook to d8, intending to slide the king over and push the pawn to f8 and win the game. Here I play rook a2, I could have gone king g6 as well, but king g6 would lose to check, king h7, king to e8, check, and now white can build the side bridge with rook to d8, offering the trade of rooks. If I move the rook, white gets a queen and wins the game, and if I trade after takes, king g7, king to e7, white promotes the pawn to a queen and will win the game as well. So I go rook a2, Magnus plays king e7. Of course at this point we're down to seconds. I play king g6, he queens, check, king d7, check, Magnus finds queen to d6, forcing me to trade the rook for the queen here. Obviously I resign. Did I resign or flag? I think I resigned here, but after takes here, white simply has a king and a rook versus a king, and with the 1 second increment, Magnus will win this game every time. So unfortunately after queen e6, I lose this very tough game. You could say it's tough because I had chances to draw the game. On the other hand, I also allowed a mate in 1, which I got away with a couple of weeks ago when I played against Ruud Mkhitaryan from Armenia, where he missed a mate in 1, and I did win Title Tuesday. So it's kind of hard because on the one hand, I want to be upset that my technique wasn't great at the end to try and save the game, but I also allowed mate in 1. So it goes both ways. At the end of the day, Magnus does win this game. This means that Magnus would win Title Tuesday with 9.5 points out of 11. I would finish in 3rd place on tiebreaks with 9 out of 11 behind Alexei Serrana. Nonetheless, I hope you guys enjoyed this game, or this video I should say. It was a fun game to play. Obviously a lot of clips were made out of the mate in 1 that Magnus missed, and of course people can always say I'm better than the world champion and the number 3 player in the world because I don't miss mate in 1s. I'm better than both of them. So at least there's some hope for people to be a little bit delusional about the future and think that they can be better than the best players in the world. But at any rate, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back soon with some more great recaps from Magnus games and my games and everything else in the world of chess. See you guys soon. Have a good one. Bye.